I knew as a professional pilot, I knew that if you've been in an accident, you turn off the battery, turn off the fuel. So I reached to the instrument panel to do all those things. Being a professional, there was no instrument panel. It was as though a giant had come along in front of the helicopter, punched through the flaps, grabbed the top of the instrument panel, and ripped it and rotated it underneath the aircraft.
That was today's guest, Pete Gillies, and I'm today's host, Jon Gray. I'd like to welcome you to the Helicopter Podcast, brought to you by Vertical HeliCASTS. I've stolen the show today from Halsey Schider, bringing you a conversation with aviation legend Pete Gillies and Doug Williams. At the time of recording, Pete Gillies was 92 years old and had spent 49 years as a legendary helicopter pilot. After 49 years of flying and spending most of his life shooting rifles and handguns, Pete's hard of hearing, so he had to implement some creative strategies to ask Pete questions during the recording. Pete Gillies is known for his expertise in long line and vertical reference operations, mountain flying, and auto rotation training. Pete previously earned recognition as the Helicopter Association International's Instructor of the Year. During a recent conversation with Dave Callan, who's a retired Las Vegas Metropolitan Police helicopter pilot and the owner of SR3 Training Concepts, he stated he would not have survived the 2 engine failures he experienced during his career without the training he received while flying at Western Helicopters with Pete Gillies. His journey into aviation was unconventional, despite growing up in an aviation-centric household. His father was a vice president at Grumman Aircraft, and his mother was a WASP pilot during World War II. Gillies initially showed little interest in flying. It wasn't until a chance flight in a Hughes 269B that he found his passion for helicopters, quickly becoming a commercially rated pilot and balancing various flying opportunities alongside his day job. Throughout his career, Gillies has developed a unique approach to teaching auto rotation, emphasizing the necessity of flying realistically and preparing for real emergencies. He advocates the importance of cyclic back as a response to rotor power loss and highlights the significant gaps in flight training related to this critical maneuver. His wealth of experience includes handling numerous emergencies, including a harrowing helicopter crash, which you heard him start to describe. Pete and his passengers remarkably survived that crash. Enjoy the conversation. Cheers.
Okay, 2 things here. First, the worst accident I had was in a 500D on a survey flight when the senior surveyor had asked if we could bring his son along on an empty seat. This was a monthly flight I made at the Seven Oaks Dam, and it involved going to 64 different aerial targets, huge X's that could show up on aerial photos, part of the Seven Oaks Dam project. And on this particular day, the senior surveyor who sat next to me in the right front asked if his young son could ride. Fine. This was all Corps of Engineers, and the safety briefings never ended, Corps of Engineers. And every time we had one, I would remind everyone, don't ever let anything get out of this helicopter while we're flying. Don't throw anything, just don't. The day started out at Seven Oaks, started out murky, cold, foggy, but for a helicopter pilot, VFR, you can see 10 feet, you fly. So we're out there doing landing, guy gets out, fixes a target, gets back in. These are all either one skids or toe ins or hover on and off. These are not improved landing areas. So we have done 40, 45 or 48 of these 60-some, and I'm just coming over a ridge line where I could see the Redlands Airport very easily. And my regular left guy sitting behind me, part of the Corps of Engineers employment, he's the guy that I would let out to fix targets. He's sitting there, and he allowed a hoodie to get out the left rear door. And that was even worn, because in a 500, between the door and the tail rotor, there's nothing. In a Jet Ranger, you have a horizontal stabilizer that can catch clothing most of the time, but in the 500, if it gets out the door, it's in the tail rotor. So we're coming along, and I'm just starting to let down into the valley next to Redlands Airport to do our last 4 or 5 targets. And during the construction of the dam, they want photos accurate aerial photos every month, because if the ground starts to shift, then don't keep building the dam. So they want to know this every month. Precise aerial photos taken after I have had the survey crew out there making sure that all the targets were full length, no brush hanging over them.
The reason they were doing this is because the dam is built right next to the San Andreas Fault. And so they want to know how the fault was affecting this dam. That was the purpose.
Thank you. That's a good point. The fault does go right by the dam. Thank you, Doug. Yes. So out goes the sweatshirt, and instantly the aircraft yaws because the tail rotor and half of the gearbox have just disappeared. And they have never been found. This was years ago. Never been found. And they've been looked for by everybody and his uncle. NTSB, sheriff. Okay, so the gearbox, half of the gearbox and the tail rotor is gone. I now have no pedal of any kind. I also now have a CG problem because the senior surveyor sitting next to me, about 260 pounds, and I have just lost what normally requires 2 hands to carry off into the tailbone. So I've got a nose-heavy problem now, and I can sense that, and I've got the Cyclic back in my gut, and and Doug's been out to the crash site. There are 3 hydroelectric plants up the Santa Ana River, and they all have transmission lines coming down the river. And these transmission lines are in front of me. I can't turn around. There's nothing behind me. I have to, and I couldn't maintain it. I could see Redlands Airport a mile and a half away. No way could I apply enough power to get over these power lines to get to the airport.
This is also very mountainous terrain. It's not flat at all. There's nowhere to set down.
So it was decision time, and you just reach into your experience and your skill and your knowledge as deeply as you can, and you got to do it right now. I thought about going under the wires, which I could have done, but I would never have recovered. We'd have crashed going down, rolling down. There's the Hall Road where these 50-foot wide, where these quarry trucks were building the dam. They were driving in this road. That was within sight, but there was a giant transmission line between where I was and that. You have to analyze this in a matter of seconds. I had an aircraft that required full aft cyclic. I had no pedal control. I got wires here, here, and here. And so I looked down, and almost straight below me, what looked like an almost level area on the side of the mountain. And I made the decision to land on that spot. And there was no way I could make a normal approach. I'm going to have to go down vertically. I've got wires, I have no room, I have no pedal control. So I was able to position the aircraft way above, probably 300 or 400 feet above this spot that I thought was flat, no trees. And I started down. And I kept some power in because it was obvious with the load I had, if I had put the pitch all the way down, we would have dropped like a rock and then a sudden stop at the bottom. So knowing we're going to spin, I kept some power in. So we are spinning to the right. Normally you've got a left pedal and you can hold a heading, but no tail rotor. And this was all being witnessed from people at the dam site. And they estimated that I made a 360 about once per second. Once per second, 1,000, 2, 1,000. And the best estimate was he made 6 360s coming down. And I'm sitting there like this. And down we go. And when the view I get is interesting because here's the mountain right there. Here's Redlands Airport. Here's the valley. Here's the dam. You know, bing, 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 bing. About 6 turns, and we hit. I had full aft cyclic, and when I thought we were going to hit, I pulled all the pitch we had left. And I remember feeling the acceleration, the increased yaw at that moment with more torque. And we hit, and the hit was indescribable because it wasn't a flat area. It was about a 20-degree slope. And the aircraft hit spinning, and so all the rotatables, well, there's no rotation on the tail rotor, it's gone, but the rotor blades hit the slope. Everything disintegrated. Nothing left. We came to an upright stop on this 20-degree slope. The blades were all gone. My passenger is still there. There's no wind, there's no plexiglass in front of me. And the aircraft starts to roll. It rolls clockwise from my position, starts rolling, and the slope gets steeper and steeper. And we're rolling through small trees, heavy brush. I ended up with my Ray-Bans having smacked into my nose bridge here. All the headsets were wrapped up around the rotor. We all had hitches, all wrapped around the rotor. We rolled and rolled. It got steeper and steeper until it was about like this, going through small trees. One came up right inside my right leg, it ripped my flight suit, but not me. And I'm just sitting there. I'm flying, man. I got the Cyclic, the pedals going. And I thought we were going all the way down this canyon. And if we had, I wouldn't be sitting here. Suddenly, the aircraft ends up almost level. There's flowers, butterflies. Very nice day. And gee, my senior surveyor is moaning because he's got his hips dislocated. I knew as a professional pilot, I knew that if you've been to an accident, you turn off the battery, turn off the fuel, and so forth. I reached to the instrument panel to do all those things. Being a professional, there was no instrument panel. It was as though a giant had come along in front of the helicopter, punched through the plex, grabbed the top of the instrument panel, and ripped it and rotated it underneath the aircraft. So the battery was on, the fuel was on, nothing was burning, no odor, nothing hissing, sizzling. So the two guys in the back bolted out, ran up through the broken down trees and brush to the point where they could yell at people down at the dam to call 911. Well, it had already been called. So for the next couple of hours, it looked like World War III with helicopters going around and around, all the media out there. The senior surveyor with his hip problem, no way could he be walked out of this. So we waited and waited for the San Bernardino County UH-1 Huey, which was their rescue ship, but which was out of county, to be brought back, rigged up for hoist, and then brought to the scene. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there with my passenger, the two young guys in the back, and long since gone. Finally, here comes the Huey, down comes the rescue tech with the basket, and very carefully loaded the right front passenger. Off they went, and that left me at the wreck site. So the final chapter is, there I am. There's one of the sheriff's 500s is flying around looking for me. He don't see me. He noticed I carry, normally back in those days, I had screwdrivers, and I had all kinds of stuff. All that was gone. Everything that was in the cockpit was gone. Nobody's coming in to do a one skid and let me get on board. So I thought, I'm going to have to walk out of here. I start walking uphill through all this down brush, and there's my notepad. There's my lunchbox. Oh, wow. There's my cap. So as I walked up, fighting my way through the broken brush, I found half of what I lost. Get up there on top, and here comes the sheriff's helicopter. Saw me, the gal TFO, no door on, and they hovered while I climbed in the back. And the rest is on Channel 7 TV. As they took me down for a close-up with the blood running down my cheeks and all that.
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. Are you ready for the largest vertical aviation show in the world? Verticon, formerly HAI Heli Expo, is coming to Dallas in March. With over 15,000 professionals and 600 companies in attendance, this is an event you don't want to miss. If you're interested in exhibiting, contact sales at verticalavi.org. That's sales at verticalavi.org. See you at Verticon.
The moral of the story, though, that you always talk to me about is that the spinning doesn't kill you. It's the impact with the ground that kills you. And I think that's the takeaway.
That is true. Thank you. That's very, very true. Spinning is not a problem. Hitting hard is a problem. Right. The spinning, okay, it's a shock when it's happening, when you have no tail rotor at all. It's a shock at how fast it goes when you're pulling power. It's a shock. Wow. But as I said, it only lasted for maybe 6 turns, and there were lots of people that saw this. Also, there were people that saw the tail rotor fly off the aircraft, and it never been found. I'll tell you, the lesson that I learned there, which I didn't think about it as a lesson, but it's keep flying. Don't become a spectator. Keep trying to fix whatever's wrong. One of the famous test pilots, Bob Hoover, has been quoted many times as saying, fly the aircraft as far into the accident as you can. Don't just say, well, we're going to crash, cover your eyes. And that's what I wasn't thinking of that at the time, but speaking of those test pilots, Dad being a test pilot, and there's an organization, the Society of Experimental Test Pilots, and he was a member for decades, and he knew all the test pilots. They all knew each other, guys that we are worshiping today because they finally passed away. That was a part of all this at Edwards Air Force Base, every month, meetings and all that. But Hoover said, his famous words are, fly it as far into the crash as you can. Don't let go and give up. And that's what I essentially did. And I wasn't thinking about this. Come on, I'm just an ordinary guy. I wasn't thinking about, well, let's see, what would a real professional do in this case?
You don't have time.
So that takes care of that accident. And all accidents I've had, if I hadn't have gone to work that day, they wouldn't have happened. You can really, in my case anyway, with all the stuff going on all the time, there was something that if I hadn't done this or this, hadn't gotten out of bed that morning, hadn't have turned right when I could have turned left, stuff like that, you can go back and you can eat your heart out with, if I'd have only done this or whatever. You just have to toss that away. And my way of doing that over all 44 years for Western, if I'd had an accident today and you guys were pilots at the company, I would say, listen to me, I'm going to tell you what happened and what I did wrong and what I don't want you to do. That gets it off your shoulders. But there are the majority of pilots that have accidents, keep it within themselves, are embarrassed about it. Oh, how did I make that mistake? Or what could I have done differently? And my method is get it off my shoulders, share it, and teach. And that has always worked for me.
Yeah, that you talked about having the Cyclic back in this crash.
Okay, that is the most disturbing thing that I've discovered in all the years with helicopters, which again totals 49 years. And countless missions, I've flown everything. By the way, flying a helicopter, as you do fly a helicopter, you know it's no more difficult than driving your car.
Well, not in the beginning, it's not. In the beginning, it's, like you said, you got humbled, But eventually, yes, you're right.
No, I mean, really, And they all fly the same. You can get in a sky crane in lower Siberia and you can fly it today. They all have a stick connected in pedals. You may sit on different sides of the cockpit. It may be a huge aircraft. It may have 2 or 3 engines or a rubber band, but you can fly it. And you can too. They're all the same, just like vehicles anywhere in the world. They're all the same.
Also, on just a side note on that tail rotor story, a couple of years ago before we got the heavy rains, a helicopter pilot friend of mine and drone pilot. We took 3 drones out there, and I spent 2 days hiking those hills.
Oh, really?
We got Pete and a couple witnesses to show us exactly where he hit. And in 2 days, I found a piece of aluminum, maybe 2 by 4 inches. That's the only thing.
Wow.
That tail rotor is still out there somewhere. I mean, we're talking tail rotor and gearbox of a 500. Now, not small, not huge, but it's never been found. It's still out there. And we wanted to find it to see if the hoodie was still in it and, what exactly had broken, why it had separated. And to this day, it's still out there. We've never found it. So.
Did you guys have metal detectors out there and everything?
Didn't have metal detectors. We're talking, when you look at the Seven Oaks Dam, the first ridge to the right, it's almost straight down. It was really, really hard to hike. We'd have to go back and forth. It's super loose. And now, because of the rains, the vegetation has grown too much. So we didn't have metal detectors, but we had we hiked around and we had drones flying and looking for anything shiny or anything that was human made, and we didn't find anything other than that little piece. So it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, dang.
Hoping to find that tail rotor so we could bring it back.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. Well, before we get into the Cyclic back, Doug, can you talk about what VAI was hoping to do with Pete and the recording that we did or that you guys did at SBSO?
Yeah, Chuck Street, Commander Chuck Street, who was flown traffic for many, many years, is now on the board of directors for VAI, which is formerly HAI. And we did at Heli Expo, Pete and I did a Cyclic back lecture for the crowd. It was a pretty big deal because Pete had never spoken at HAI or VAI before, and he wanted to get a helicopter pilot audience. And so it was kind of a big deal for us to be able to speak there. And Chuck was in the audience, and Chuck suggested that we make the same presentation into a webinar so that it could be shared worldwide. And so that was the where we sat down at the San Bernardino Sheriff's Aviation Station 40, and we brought in an audience and some camera equipment, and we had him do his full Cyclic back presentation. And it's currently in the editing process. We were hoping that maybe next month they'll be done, and that will be presented from VAI to its members. So we're looking forward to seeing that. It's, like I said, it's still in the editing process, and we haven't seen any of it yet, but it's done, and we're well on the way to getting that presented.
That's exciting. I remember, I brought up that I'd seen Pete in his presentation at HAI back in, I think it was 2014, somewhere around there. And I wasn't a pilot at the time. I was just a TFO. And sitting and listening to his class, I was like, holy cow. It was amazing. So to get the information out there through VAI, through our podcast now, I think will be very impactful. It was impactful for me, again, not having been a pilot back then, to get this information out to folks that will save lives. I think,
exactly.
Think about Pete and all the instructing he's done over the years. You've got to imagine he's saved hundreds, if not thousands of lives.
Many pilots come up and tell us stories, and it's, it makes the hair and stand up all over me just hearing these guys say, you basically saved my life by doing this. And one thing about Pete that's different is when you go in to get a helicopter license, you're being instructed to take the test, the check ride, and everything they're doing is telling you how to do the check ride. When I fly with Pete, everything he's doing is telling me how to stay alive and do a job differently. And it has nothing to do with the check ride or the FAA. It's real life, real scenarios. And that's one of the things I've appreciated the most about working with him. That real life experience that again, has nothing to do with that check ride.
Kind of goes back to what he was talking about with the military background. A lot of military aviators have this checkbox of things they've got to accomplish, whereas he's focusing on what you're saying. Things that are practical, that are going to save your life over the course of your aviation career.
Right.
So, Pete, can you talk about the principles of the Cyclic back presentation?
Cyclic back is so absolutely simple in concept and reality that it is almost criminal that our government has chosen not to mention this in any of the flight training or publications. Once again, I'm laying a foundation here. I've had no formal training. That has given me no rules, opportunity to look, try, teach things that are not in the book, that if you'd been to flight school, you'd never heard about them. Same thing here. But I had total freedom. I didn't realize this. I only realized it in the past year or two, that this is one of the secrets of what I've been able to do and share with the industry is because I've had no formal training. I've never been in a school, a simulator, anything. After the initial dual training, that was it. Everything else has been just, I'm willing to try it. Oh, you might be through a flight school and you'll leave a helicopter pilot, but you will also know, don't ever try that, don't ever try that. But nobody ever told me that. So I have been able to do things, try things, where nobody has said, Pete, don't do that, don't do that. Nobody ever said that to me. So it's given me a license to learn, and with the way I was brought up, enough common sense that I'm still here talking to you. What I noticed over 30 years ago in looking at photographs of totally wrecked helicopters, no survivors, I started noticing a trend, and that was that of the wreckage, no bodies. No, you don't show the bodies, they've been removed, but here's the wreckage before they collect it and take it someplace. I started seeing one or more rotor blades that had little, if any, damage. The rest of the helicopter is trash, junk, not even recognizable, but here's one or two blades, a couple like this. Maybe a bug on them, but no twisting, no bending, no sign that they contact anything. I started noticing this over 30 years ago, and I put together Cyclic back over 30 years ago, and I wrote articles about it that were completely shunned by the American publications because I had concluded that the pilots had not applied aft cyclic. And the big secret, which is still a secret today, this is a damning thing to say, is that if you have an engine, I'm talking about conventional helicopters, not the new EVTOL type. I'm talking about helicopters that have two or more rotor blades. One blade gives you a balance problem you can't solve. I say two or more rotor blades with some kind of conventional power plant, a cyclic and collective, and from there, whatever body style you want. Conventional helicopters that start, fly collective, lift up, forward cyclic, fly away, standard stuff. The secret that is, to this moment, not published, is very simply this.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical HeliCASTS and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
You're flying along, and we all have sometime during a typical flight, you're just flying along. You may be going someplace to drop somebody off, or you may be going to spray a field or whatever. But at some point, you lift up from where the helicopter is parked, and you fly someplace. In the context of flying along, you lose power to the rotor system. It's easy to say engine failure, but there's a lot between some of the engines and the rotors, a lot of stuff in there that could also create the same symptom here. All of a sudden, there's a yaw, rotor RPM starts down. If you've been properly taught, you will immediately, you never take your hand off the collective. Don't ever take your hand off the collective. You will immediately bottom the collective. And then in many of the instructions, you will then be urged to achieve a certain airspeed. And that's it. It is so wrong and so deadly. I want you to convert your helicopter to a glider the moment you lose power to the rotor. I don't want you to think about anything else. And how do you do that? You apply aft cycling. You change the attitude from air being sucked in the top of the rotor and blown out the bottom Do the opposite, air coming up through the blades, which is what an auto rotation is all about. Until you have air coming up through the blades, you're not in an auto rotation. You can only do that with half cyclic. Automatic collective just flattens the pitch of the blades, slows down how fast the rotor RPM is dropping, but never stops it and never reverses it. The biggest secret is that on your rotor tack, you will have a scale of rotor RPM, and you'll have, in the case of an analog gauge, you'll have an upper red line, you'll have a green zone, and a lower red line. And you've been taught by your instructor to always, in flight, keep the rotor RPM in the green. So you're flying along, something fails, rotor RPM is normally somewhere near the top of the green, upper 2/3. Suddenly the rotor RPM starts down, and you feel a yaw, you've lost power, rotor RPM's coming down, and you do what you've been trained to do. You put the pitch down. That does one thing. It slows down how fast the rotor RPM is falling because it reduces the drag of the blades from having pitch to the flat. But it does not stop the decrease in rotor RPM. It does not stop it. It slows it down. And at that point, the instructions you've received and what are written in the book often will tell you to achieve a certain airspeed while you're figuring out where to land. Of course, you're at the airport already. You're never away from the airport. You always have a smooth heart service, and the tower has already told you, cleared as requested, whatever. Yeah, right. Anyway, you put the collective down. It doesn't stop the rotor RPM falling. And the big secret is, and here is your upper red line, green, lower red line. Right here on the rotor jack, unmarked, unmentioned, is the point where if you allow the rotor RPM to get past that, you're dead. The rotor, no matter what you do in the cockpit from that point on, once the rotor has passed this unmarked RPM, no matter what you do, there's no saving it. The rotor will continue to slow down. And if you're high enough when this happens, people on the ground watching will see the rotor blades come to a stop. And if you're high enough, they'll start turning backwards. Because the air rushing through. There's no recovery. No recovery. The solution, when the rotor RPM starts falling for any reason, cyclic back. If you happen to have your hand on the collective down is fine. But this is the number one control. When you're in an auto rotation, you do not have to maintain a particular airspeed or anything. The helicopter in an auto rotation loves it. There's no torque in anything, and especially if the engine is quit, the rest of the helicopter is very happy about that. You can stop, you can back up, you can turn around, you can slide sideways, you can do any maneuver you want to except flying in an auto rotation. And in the advanced course at Western, we did this all the time. It was so much fun. The helicopter is happy. Could only be happier if the engine would completely shut down and stop making noise and getting the tailbone dirty, you know. That's what it's all about. And the manufacturers will not talk about that. And as Doug was talking here before, BAI in Las Vegas years ago, the NTSB, two people from NTSB put on a lecture and a video that I thought was the breakthrough. And now the FAA would get on board, the manufacturers would get on board. That has never happened. Never happened. The FAA, I attended, my wife, Pat, attended a packed class at Las Vegas at Heli Expo. The FAA did a magnificent job of presenting Cyclic back with simulators, videos, lectures, and everything. I was convinced at that moment that Cyclic back would see daylight from that point on. It had never been mentioned. So somebody between the FAA and the NTSB and the OEM, somebody who had basically said, stop talking about it. It doesn't exist. Ignore it.
That concept, driving the rotor system is what we talk about and how you save lives. Have you experienced that scenario in real life where you applied that outside of the crash you described?
No, if I have, I didn't realize it at the time. I remember I'm an airplane pilot, and I'm flown, from the Learjets on down, I'd flown everything. Any off-flight. Yes.
So we've talked about Cyclic back, and you've been involved in multiple crashes and incidents. Unfortunately, in our industry, crashes are going to happen ongoing. They're never going to disappear. What advice do you have for folks that might find themselves in a position where they're anticipating a crash?
What I want taught from lesson number 1 to a new pilot is, and I want this in writing in the checklist that the instructor is using, in the checklist that the FAA is using to evaluate the pilot. I want Cyclic back to be number 1 in response to a loss of power to the rotor, for whatever reason. Rotor RPM is down, I want Cyclic back. You can keep the collective down and they're fine. But if you fly very much and you look at your own cockpit, you'll realize that the collective is there. All it is a propeller pitch control. That's all it is. In an airplane with a variable pitch prop, you have it on the panel. Flat pitch, it happens to be on your left side. That's all it is to the rotary wing. I've got a whole 5 minutes on the fundamentals of helicopter flight that make it so simple when you sit back and you look at what's really happening compared to an airliner or a biz jet or anything else. There's so much similarity between what we're doing here and the location of the controls. I want Cyclic back to show up as the number 1 response to a loss of power to the rotor. I don't care why the power's gone. Take your pick. It's easy to say engine failure, but that is not 100% true at all. And the 300, with the idler pulley and the spring and the pulley, if that breaks in flight,
Lost power.
you have something else going on. Not only do you have rotor RPM going on, you got everything on the panel overspeeding. And a good instructor will beat on you if you allow overspeeds to occur on your instrument panel while you're taking primary training. Considering that bad, that's destructive. It's going to explode, and something's going to fail. So you teach new pilots to not allow overspeeds to occur, rotor, engine, whatever. Overspeeds will hurt nothing. Those lines, red lines, are there for a reason, but it's not because if you go beyond them, you're going to self-destruct in flight. So students get this idea that they've got to absolutely fly this particular way. And if you're flying along, well-trained, and power goes away, and you're not at the airport, you're over, the minute all this stuff works great if you're at the airport. You got unlimited pavement and the control tower and crash rescue and blah, blah, blah. Just leave the airport. What kind of a world are you in? Now, you've got to be accurate. You have to get the aircraft under full control, which is cyclic back and pitch down. Now, as I taught for a long time at Western, priority number 2, pick a place to land. Number 3, make that spot. And make that spot may mean stopping, going this way, right underneath you, getting away from it. The helicopter is completely willing to do anything you want to do if you keep your rotor in the green. And as long as the pitch is down, the rotor's are green. It's so simple, but it's never mentioned. It's never mentioned. And that's just a crime. And it begins with flight school, primary training, and then recurrency training. The FAA guy that comes out to give you a check ride once or twice a year, he's got blinders on. It's all written down for him. He wants you to do one of these, one of these, one of these. Never any discussion, and don't do anything that you haven't been trained to do. Because he will look at you and say, what was that for? I'm going to tear this up. I'll be back next week. Don't do that again. Where'd you learn that? Type thing. So we're faced with that mentality also. Cyclic back has got to end up being the number one priority. And people have to understand the bad news, which is that if, for whatever reason, the rotor RPM gets down below red line to a place that everybody acknowledges, everybody who knows says, yes, that's right, but nobody will say anything about it, write anything about it, and you won't see it on the instrument panel. I do want to say one more thing in talking about this.
This podcast is brought to you by HeliCASTS. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. HeliCASTS handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter is sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at HeliCASTS today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-HeliCASTS, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@helicopter.com. HeliCASTS. List it, sell it, done.
We have had an organization in Los Angeles, Professional Helicopter Pilots Association, PHPA, for years. They asked me several years ago to put on a lecture about cyclic back because I had mentioned it in dinner meetings, and Doug had supported me several times, giving videos and backup assistance at these meetings. And PHP said, we'd like you to do a formal class on this. It was scheduled for a nice Saturday morning at Van Nuys in a nice classroom. Place was packed. I didn't know a lot of the pilots, but we're talking about police, movie, traffic watch, lots of helicopter pilots were there. So the lecture went very smoothly. And finally it's over, and everyone stood up, and there was some applause, and some people came up, shook my hand, and thanked me. And everybody filed out of the room, except for one person. Sitting over by a window seat in about the fifth row back, a gentleman that I couldn't recognize. He just sat there. He wasn't looking at me, but he wasn't looking out the window either. He just sat there looking straight ahead. Deep in thought, I didn't know. But I didn't want to leave him behind, so I kind of dug my feet, putting stuff in my pockets. And, several minutes went by, and he was still sitting there, so I moved from behind the little podium, and I took a couple of steps down into the aisle, and I started slowly walking toward the back of the room. He got up. He walked over to meet me, and he had his hand held out to shake my hand. I still did not know who he was. He said, and I will never forget these words. He said, my name is Ray Prouty. I wish I had heard your lecture before I wrote my last book. That moment will never leave me. He was the authority on everything to do with helicopter aerodynamics, a consultant to all the helicopter manufacturers. He was the highest, most knowledgeable engineer of rotor and helicopter systems in this part of the world. And Bob Spencer had all of his books.
I've got them too.
I thought I had just shaken hands with God. I mean, any doubt that I had about people saying, you don't need to do that, just lower the collective and establish 100 knots, lower that. Any doubt I had went away completely, which is why I can speak with confidence about this. So I wanted to get that out on the record here. That was an extremely important thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't have to, once you have verification from someone with that background and intelligence and reputation, you don't need to ask any more questions, right.
Wow, this has been amazing. Your life and your experiences, the teachings that you've passed down the line, all the folks that you've interacted with and influenced over the course of your career is amazing. Thank you for everything you've done over the course of your career. in your life, all the positive impacts you've had on our industry. It's really neat to sit back and go over that. We've only been talking for just shy of 2 hours, and we've flown over the course of your career, and we know there's so many stories that are built into all these different things you're talking about. But we did get a piece to understand a piece of your life and some of the situations that you encountered. So thank you for doing that. That was really cool. As you look back on your career, anything you'd like to say, any words of encouragement for new folks that might be coming into the industry? You're a happy man. You've done all the things. How can someone follow your footsteps and be as happy as you?
And what?
Be as happy as you are.
By avoiding the highly structured environment to learn and operate helicopter flying, which I did by not being in the military and by not being in the military and by having the freedom to try anything I wanted to. Look, obviously you're a multitask person, and I've also already tried to tell you, this is another one right here. Someone like both of you here, with your backgrounds, can do what I did. You just have to forget anybody's ever taught you anything, that you forget you know anything, and just use your common sense, just like watching you plug in all the electronics here, Well, you're comfortable with that. That's easy. You get around this guy, you put a tool in his hand, and even if he hasn't got anything to fix, he'll find something to fix. Just beautiful to have the characters, the backgrounds that you guys have. The structured training that we go through in aviation today is what I avoided unknowingly because I had no reason to take any special training. The stuff like vertical reference, long line, that's subject of another podcast because not only did I not know, I didn't know which way a long line went, down or up, basically in the beginning. And yet I ended up being able to teach it to pilots that absolutely were like stone, because I figured out a way to do that. I would love to share that in another podcast. That's one of the stories I love to tell. So I don't know. I know what you're asking. One of the questions that was on paper here was, well, how would I like to be remembered? Just 2 words, cyclic back, believe it or not. Of all the things that I have run across in all my years, that's the most significant. And you say, come on, Pete, you've done this, you've done that, mountain, power line construction, blah, blah, blah. All self-taught, but all because nobody said don't. And as far as height velocity, hovering, out-of-ground effect, in the world I've been living in all these years, it doesn't exist. If you're going to worry about engine failures because you're too close to the ground and all, and you're going to crash and burn, go become a fisherman or something. Don't do that to yourself. Don't go through life afraid of what you're doing if there's some particular thing. If I have no fear, that's another thing. Nothing has ever scared me. Nobody's ever said no. And at Western, we had 14 helicopters when I joined them. 14. 6 500Cs, 6 Bell 47G 3B1s, which are turbocharged and sea level power to 14,000 feet. A Huey and a round motor Sikorsky H-34, 14 ships, in which I had no experience. The attitude of the military guys who had grown up in Vietnam flying the UX-6, of course, the 500, their attitude was, well, these aren't our helicopters, but Pete, you ever flown one of those? I don't even know what I'm looking at. Get up in the pilot seat, I'll show you how to start it. Take it around the patch a few times and you're checked out. That was that was how I got checked out in a bunch of aircraft. I don't know even which seat to sit in. And there's some guy telling me, you get in, and, oh yeah, sit in the left on this one, or sit in the right on that one. I'll show you how to start the engine. Took it around the patch a few times, but don't hit anything. So that was a lot of the training I had. That's where it was, because the guys were all so well trained, so well experienced. And here I was with nothing but just the willingness. Let me try it. Yeah.
If you were talking to a beginning helicopter pilot and you had to give them advice about it being dangerous or not, or whether or not it was worth it, what would you tell them?
I'd probably say, I'm still here, and I've been doing this long before you were born. I'm still here. You can't be as involved, as happily involved as I've been for all these decades, if you have any worry at all about anything failing or hurting you. All the accidents that I've had, all the less than perfect flights I've had, I have immediately, as I mentioned earlier, let me tell you what happened to Adon. Get it off my shoulders, share it. Stuff happens. And who has had the worst accidents since they left Western? Bob Spencer and Dan Catalano. Both extremely high, experienced, totally trained, and the worst accidents they ever had were after they retired. There's a danger zone in there. And somehow it skipped me, but it's very common. You reach a point career-wise where you've been there, you've done that, and now something changes, and somebody says, "You're a pilot, right?" "Yeah." "Listen, would you show my kid how to do this or do that?" And the next thing you know, you've hung a blade in a tree limb or something, caught a wire, or trips on the side, something, and you look back on your career, your logbook is this thick, This, what happened to me? You just got old, that's all.
You bring up logbooks. How many hours do you have? Would you guess?
I have no idea. I haven't kept a logbook for years.
10?
Yeah, my dad's a Navy pilot, as I mentioned before, and after I got my helicopter certificate, and I'm puffed up, I'm keeping the logbook every minute of flight, blah, blah, blah. And I asked Dad one day, "Dad, how many hours have you been flying with my mom and with the Navy forever?" He said, "I don't know." "Dad, no, I'm talking about your logbook." "I know." He said, "I haven't kept a logbook for a long, long time. The Navy knows every flight I ever made. It's in the Smithsonian Institute or whatever, And I just thought, the FAA doesn't care how many hours I have. I stopped keeping a log. It was too much trouble. And my dad looked at me and says, "You wait. That'll happen to you someday." "Not me, Dad. No. I'm every minute. So, in this is my last flight, which was years ago. It was a Llama. At Western, I did something with a Llama, French aircraft. And that's the last entry in my logbook. So I've got a stack of logbooks about this thing. I should say I've also sold a glider.
Okay.
And that was fun.
Yeah.
That was fun. Good gas mileage.
Nice and quiet.
Yeah. So what was the date of your last flight?
And what?
What was the date of your last flight?
I don't know. 5, 6, 7 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
500.
And I haven't been off the ground since in anything.
I've tried.
No, it's not like I miss it. I would miss a session like this. This, to me, is better than any flight. Just be able to share the memories and stories with you. And, yeah.
If I put a KA-32 in front of you right now, you're saying you would not fly it?
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, that's in writing. Yeah, that would be a dream.
We were talking the other day about if you could fly anything at all right now, or he's never flown, what would he fly? And we were talking about the coaxial Russian helicopters because they're just so different. And don't have any seat time in them, and we both want to give it a try. So if anybody listening has one for us to fly, we'll take advantage of that.
I love that. That's great. Well, thank you guys both for your time. Thank you for your influence in the industry.
Thank you.
And I look forward to coming back and having another conversation about the incident that we had briefly described. So we'll have to come back and describe that and touch on that sometime. But until then, we'll catch you later. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for
Thanks for
making
having
this
us.
happen.
Yes, my pleasure.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right.
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. Are you ready for the largest vertical aviation show in the world? Verticon, formerly HAI HeliExpo, is coming to Dallas in March. With over 15,000 professionals and 600 companies in attendance, this is an event you don't want to miss. If you're interested in exhibiting, contact sales at verticalavi.org. That's sales at verticalavi.org. See you at Verticon.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical HeliCASTS and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators. This podcast is brought to you by HeliCopter. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. HeliCopter handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter is sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at HeliCopter today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-HeliCopter, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@helicopter.com. HeliCopter. List it, sell it, done.